Scotland's population will be 500,000 short in 20 years, the SNP have yet again claimed. Of course, this is a ruse to either have immigration powers at their disposal, or, at the very least, a means to push for independence, quote unquote, yet again, by blaming Westminster for the supposed issues the populace will begin to see in the future. But you do have to ask yourself a few questions. There's a few contradictions lavished in and around the left-wing guff for open borders are the next best thing. 20 years ago, the UN published a paper called Replacement Migration. And the premise was based around the fact that in the future, it was predicted via projections that the West will see a decline in birth rates and an ageing population would ensue. And 20 years ago, nobody did anything to prevent it becoming a problem to begin with. Nothing was done, in fact. Silence. Now the SNP are using now we have the SNP proclaiming that projections will show a shortage 20 years from now. So what do they propose we do for the time being? What do they propose we do to make sure these issues don't become issues 20 years from now? Well, I'll tell you what they're not doing. They're not encouraging family creation. They'd rather rely on migration. Now, we get told to no end that AI in the future will take about a third of the jobs. Then we get told that we're responsible for climate change or global warming, take your pick. You would think, theoretically, that a so-called carbon footprint would decline as the population began to decline. So explain to me how in one breath you get told that a reduction in the populace is a good thing for climate change, but then in the next breath get told that a migration is needed to solve the aging populace and the decline in your population. It's almost as if mass migration is the end goal and they're quite prepared to bullshit and lie their way to it, regardless of the cost, regardless of the consequences, and regardless of whether or not they have to own up for contradictions in previous claims. No. It's becoming more and more apparent with the hijacking of country after country by fake left-wingers masquerading themselves as progressives that the end goal will be met one way or the other. Sustainable developments, the SNP, Sturgeon, Goal 10, halfway down the target list, specifically states facilitation of safe, regular and orderly migration. And isn't it funny how every single bullet point up until that point has been met? Every target has been completed near enough by Helmet Head. Now they're at the migration quandary. They need control one way or the other. Isn't it funny? Isn't it convenient? And elsewhere the same thing arises. Scotland's population will be 500,000 smaller by 2040 than it would be if control over immigration policies were devolved, restricting economic growth and harming the public services, the SNP has claimed, because the SNP are very good at blaming everybody else. They have had 20 years almost. About 15 or 16 years they've been in charge. They've had all that time to start putting things in order to make sure that we never came to the supposed crisis, or approached it anyway. But yet, they've done nothing. They'd rather blame the fact they don't have control over immigration. All the years they've had European freedom of movement at their disposal, clearly not done enough to incentivise people to come over. And then of course we take into consideration the most obvious elephant in the room that's been ignored. Conveniently, or coincidentally, native births, family creation. God forbid we do that. It seems to me that they're quite content on just relying on migration, knowing full well what that will do to the demographics of the future if current projections are anything to go by. But that doesn't seem to be an issue. The party's projections show Scotland risks being overhauled by smaller nations such as Ireland and Norway within 20 years of its missing 500,000. The prediction comes as new reports reveal the skill shortages have cost Scottish businesses more than 360 million this year. I find this a bizarre claim, considering I have seen multiple times on and offline I've heard that people can't find jobs in Scotland, but yet the SNP brag about a record level of unemployment rates. Something isn't right in that regard. But hey-ho. The cost of failing to find qualified staff has increased by more than 10 million over the past year. Nearly 2/3 of Scots businesses surveyed by the Open University said they expect Brexit to make the skills shortage worse. And you know, this is another claim that I find bizarre. The post-Brexit immigration white paper that they speak of, which they're blaming for this supposed peril we will find ourselves in, is that there's a cap, a limit. Yeah, a minimum requirement of 30k a year salary is what was being proposed. Now surely for highly skilled sectors in Scotland, migrants wouldn't see an issue in that regard. Doctors and so on. They're going to be earning more than 30k, surely. So it does beg the question, as I've said before, is it low-skilled immigration that they're actually after, but they pretend that it's high-skilled? Or, it's becoming more and more apparent what it is. Qualified sectors wouldn't be affected by this cap. The Scottish Government and MPs, SNP MPs, have called for immigration powers to be devolved to combat the demographic crisis that they've had 20 years to solve. They've got another 20 years to solve, but oh no, let's continue down the path we're on. Let's continue the diversity programmes. Let's continue the progressive rhetoric. Let's continue to sow seeds of division and open the borders. That'll solve everything. All of our fucking problems will be solved, and we will have cohesion and cultural enrichment, because that's the SNP's way. The birth rate continues to fall, with 12,000 registered in Scotland in the fourth quarter of the year, the second lowest figure since records began. The population is expected to grow by 4.4%. All these projections, all these fucking projections mean shit when you ain't planning to act on them. Look at this. The number of people of working age went into decline in 2018, with Scotland's population ageing faster than the rest of the UK. And again, what do you want us to do about it? What should we do? Oh, let's have control over immigration. I'll solve everything. Oh yeah. Last year, the Parliament Finance Committee... it's funny, all of this hysteria you're trying to drum up just shows how shit you've been since you've taken control of Scotland. You can use the hysteria all you want to try and drum up support for devolved powers, but it just shows how lackadaisical you've been. It just shows the lack of care that has been imposed here. It just goes to show that you've done nothing at all to solve these problems. They've been staring at you in the face. By your own admission, projections show this. The Parliament Finance Committee warned that the low populace would put pressure on the government spending, with UK ministers saying immigration powers for Scotland are not required and that a separate immigration system would create added bureaucracy for businesses. However, the next PM is expected to give key economic sectors in Scotland more freedom to recruit from overseas. Scotland urgently needs to grow our population, or we face a demographic time bomb over coming decades that could make it seriously challenging to fund public services like the NHS, Linda Fabiani has said. The same Linda Fabiani who proclaims that when natural disasters occur in Africa and so on, it tends to kill girls and women more than it does men and boys, because girls are not taught how to run when they're little. Yes, that's right. That's the same Linda Fabiani who's now trying to tell you there will be a demographic time bomb. It's increasingly obvious that Scotland needs our own powers over migration and the means to grow our population. By any means necessary, bar the obvious one. Yes. The best way to grow the economy and our working age population is to restore tax parity with the rest of the UK. But the SNP solution seems to be to blame Westminster. That is exactly what's going on here. 20 years they've had, all that time, they've done fuck all. Or the 15 or so years they've been in charge, they've done nothing. They plan to do nothing for the next 20 years, apart from expect to rely on migration. It makes no sense. Surely migration would be a plan B that would only be acted upon if plan A failed. But they've not even acted upon plan A. They're pretending plan A doesn't exist. But two ways of achieving many of the things that they wish to do. Doing it regardless, or convincing people that it's the best thing for the country. And sadly, too many people see the SNP as their saving grace and latch on to every word that comes out of their mouths. But I'm telling you, they do not have your best interests at heart. There is an agenda, and it's right in your face.